Hey guys, what's going on? Today, we are doing some Photoshop magic. I hope you guys like the new intro. If you have any constructive criticism for me, please leave it in the comments down below, but I spent a really long time on it, so please don't hurt my feelings. Also, before we start, I just want to mention that I do have an Instagram and a Facebook page that I update regularly, so if you guys want to stay updated with anything I do, those are the two best places to find me. Links are in the description. So today I want to show you guys how you can sort of recover your photos. You know, sometimes you might take some photos and you look at one and you're like, that one's garbage, it's underexposed, it's, you know, whatever. Today I'm going to show you how you can fix those photos and make them usable. Now I do want to mention you shouldn't go into a shoot with the mindset of, oh, I'll just fix it later. You should always be trying to get the photo as perfect as possible in camera, and then you want your editing to sort of bring it to life afterwards. Ideally, you don't want to be fixing your photos in post, you want to be making them better than they were before. That being said, you can recover some photos that you otherwise would think you couldn't use, and I'm going to show you how. But first we have to talk about the kinds of photos you can recover and the kinds of photos that you should just don't bother, they're garbage. The biggest kind of photo that you should just never use, especially if you're being paid for taking those photos, is out of focus photos. There's nothing you can do in editing that will fix an out of focus photo, even if it's just a little bit out of focus. That extra sharpening, you know, it might fool someone if you post it on Instagram and, you know, it's just small on your phone or something like that. But if you look up close at any out of focus photo, it's very easy to tell, and it makes you look like a worse photographer and that you're trying to cover up a mistake. So if you have any photos that are out of focus, or the other one is motion blur, just forget it. Now the types of photos we can fix are photos with a little too much noise, photos that are underexposed, photos that are overexposed, and photos that have some messed up coloring in them. And most of the magic of being able to fix a photo in editing is that in the first place you're shooting in RAW. Now the stuff I'm going to show you, if you shot your photos in JPEG, is going to be a lot harder to do, or most likely not possible, because a RAW file just gives you so much more information to work with. So that's gonna be sort of our saving grace here. So I've gathered 3 photos that I've taken over the years that, you know, photos I've never really done anything with, but I was just kind of going through and seeing like, oh, I can probably recover these. I haven't actually messed around with any of these photos yet. I'm just kind of assuming I can recover them, so we're gonna see what I can do with them. Okay, so I have my 3 photos open up in Lightroom here. You can do these same kind of adjustments. You can do these same kind of adjustments in Photoshop, but since we're working with RAW files, we just want to be adjusting the RAW file rather than bringing in a TIFF or something into Photoshop and working on that. So let's identify the few things that are wrong with this photo. 1, you can see there's some natural vignetting from the lens. 2, it's very crooked, as you can see. This is the horizon here, and it is not straight. And lastly, and probably most obviously, it is underexposed. Thanks to the magic of RAW files, these are all things that you can do very easily from within any kind of RAW photo editor. So first we're gonna bring up the exposure, and as you can see, it gets kind of washed out. The contrast kind of disappears, if there was any in the first place. So now that we've brightened it up a bunch, I want to bring the shadows down a bit and sort of just add some more contrast into the image so it's not as washed out. So I'm going to increase the contrast and see what that does. Okay, that's looking a little better. I'm gonna bring the highlights down, bring the shadows up a bit, but then bring the blacks down. And I'm just gonna add a touch of dehaze. Okay, so that's looking better already. We can look at the before and after. So let's see original, and now this is what it looks like. So all the details are a lot more clear. You can very clearly see what's going on in the photo, which is great, but the color is kind of off. Now this is shot at like dusk, the sun is just going down. This can probably be considered blue hour, so that is why it looks so blue, but maybe that's not what we want for this. So now this is something that you definitely cannot do as well with a JPEG, is change the temperature, because RAW files save all of the temperature information rather than just baking it into the photo. So as you can see, I can go very warm here. That looks very artificially warm, but it's also not ruining the photo. Bring it to there. So that's probably a little warmer than a neutral color would be. Actually, it's definitely warmer than a neutral like white balance, but it's sunset, we're on a beach, so you maybe want to give it that kind of warm feeling. Because of how much I had to brighten up the photo, you can see it's a little grainy, and I'm going to add just a bit of clarity to try and sharpen it up a little bit. The photo is in focus, but just because it was shot at a lower ISO and then brought up manually just now, it's lacking a little bit of sharpness that it would have had if I shot this properly. Next, we're just going to fix this crop. Just like that, just kind of line up the horizon. You can also take the angle tool here and just drag it across the horizon like that if that's more your thing. All right, so let's do another before and after. So this is what we have so far, and that's before. So this looks worlds better already, but now I'm just gonna do some basic editing to the photo, if it was already a properly captured photo. Something like that, just to make the photo pop a little more. Now to sort of fix the fact that we've, brought up the exposure a lot artificially, as you can see here, if I zoom in, this is very grainy in this area. You see up here, lots of grain. So what I'm going to do to sort of remedy that is we're going to use some noise reduction. Now, if you add too much noise reduction, everything gets really smooth and it almost looks like you added a blur onto the photo. So you have to be very careful with the luminance noise reduction. First, I'm going to add some masking on the sharpness just so that I'm not sharpening the noise. And then I'm going to increase this just a little bit, maybe around here. It's not going to get rid of all the noise, but it should look better. So this will be very subtle, but this will be, if I turn this off. So that's with no noise reduction, and that's with our noise reduction. So it helps just to make the photo look a little more clear, and like I didn't boost up the exposure a bunch. And now finally we're gonna go into lens corrections and remove that sort of uneven vignetting we have. Now that we've brightened up the photo, it is very subtle, but I don't like it. So we're just gonna enable profile corrections. And if you're using any kind of modern lens, Lightroom is great. It'll automatically detect what lens the photo was taken with and then apply a profile correction for that specific lens. So it'll remove distortion and vignetting. And as you can see, the corners of our photo just got a lot brighter. Turn that off and on. And as you can see, it did move the photo a little bit because it's just correcting for the distortion that it knows that lens has. And there we go. That's our before and our after. So that's our first photo recovered. Moving on to number 2. So this is a photo I took in New York City, just kind of like a one-off photo, walking down, crossing a road and just being like, oh, just snap this photo really quick. I probably wasn't looking down the viewfinder based on how off the angle is in this photo. So it's off, it's very dark, you can't make out a lot of the details and the shadows here. And again, it's probably just a touch more blue than we want it to be. So we're gonna do what we did in the last photo, bring up the exposure a bit, but not too much. Somewhere around there, because we don't wanna bring the highlights up too much. And then we're gonna bring up the shadows to bring it up even more. And there, now look at all the detail we have in here. This is before and after. So again, this is the magic of a RAW file. You can do these things to JPEGs, but just not to this extent at all. I'm gonna bring the highlights down to correct for the fact that I brought up the exposure a bunch. You can see like this Levi's sign is really overexposed. Okay, that looks pretty good. Again, I'm just gonna add a little bit of clarity, a little bit of saturation. Same thing, we'll bring the temp down, not as much this time. I'm trying to get closer to like a neutral tone rather than going overly warm. I don't really want it to look warm like this. Somewhere in the middle, I would say about there looks good to me, maybe a little cooler. Okay, so this is our before and this is our after, so already much better. I'm gonna correct for the crop now, which is a little harder to do because we don't have a good view of a horizon line, but we can kind of take our best guess. And there we go, that's a lot more straight. I like to try and add contrast without, removing detail from the image. So I like a good punchy image. I don't want every detail in the shadows to be shown and every detail in the highlights to be visible. I prefer to have a lot more contrast, but just not to the extent where you can't tell what's going on in the photo. Okay, and then something similar here. I'm gonna add a mask on the sharpening. I don't really want to sharpen it any more than it already is. Adding the mask, and you can hold down Alt to see The white parts are the parts that are still getting sharpened, and the black parts are where there's no sharpening happening. And basically, the more the masking slider is up, the less things are being sharpened. So this is good because you don't necessarily want to add sharpening to things like the sky, because then you're going to bring out noise in the sky, which is something that there's no reason to sharpen the sky if it's just, you know, a blue gradient. And we want to avoid noise as much as possible, especially considering we artificially boosted this exposure up almost a full stop. I'll add a bit of noise reduction, but this photo isn't nearly as bad as the last one. So I'm just gonna go just maybe around there. I don't want to lose too much detail. All right, so this is what we have before and after. So the photo is pretty much done at this point. I'm just gonna go through, add some lens correction, even though there's not really a visible vignette. I'm gonna hit that, and it's just gonna fix some of the distortion that the lens gives. And now, because we are shooting buildings, you can also go down to transform, and this lets you change the perspective a little bit, so it looks like less like you're looking up at the buildings and more like you're looking straight at them. If you go, again, with pretty much any effect, if you go too overboard with it, then it's going to be very obvious that it's fake or that you manipulated the photo. But if you just change it a little bit, you see how it kind of makes the buildings look like you're looking more at them rather than like they're towering up above you. So we just do it a little bit like that, and then hit constrain crop so we get rid of the crop there. So we turn that off and on. You can see it's a very subtle adjustment, but it just kind of makes the buildings feel more vertical rather than like you're looking up at it, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it, but hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. And yeah, I think that one's done. So we got the before and the after. Much better, right? On to our final image. So this is a very high contrast image. And so the challenge here is I want to still have a punchy, contrasty image, but not so much so that parts of the image are difficult to see or are blown out. So this happens a lot when you shoot directly into the sun. This is the sun right here. Because the sun is obviously very bright, but then everything that isn't hit by the sun, like over here, is going to be very dark in comparison. So I don't even know if I'm going to touch the exposure, we'll see, but because here's the thing, if I bring the exposure down, it's going to just completely remove any detail in this area. That just looks almost completely black. But it'll fix for the sun. But then if I bring the exposure up too much, see, now I have detail over here, but the sun is just this giant white thing in the sky. So normally it's easier to recover shadows than it is highlights from digital files. So I might bring the exposure down just a little bit, and then boost up the shadows a ton to compensate for it. So let's try that out and see how it goes. You also don't need the sun to be perfectly exposed, right? Like, it is the sun. So if it's bright in the image, that's probably fine. So we're gonna do that and then boost up the shadows a ton. And look at that, now we have detail in the whole image. We're not done yet, but that looks so much better. This is kind of a weird cropping of a photo. Like I said, these aren't photos that I'd probably use for anything. Like, I probably wouldn't post these to Instagram, but these are more just for example's sake. So now that we've kind of balanced that out, we've brought the shadows up a bunch. I can even bring down the highlights a bit like that. So that's a good exposure. We've got lots of detail now, but there's pretty much no contrast. It's a very flat image, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but I just think it looks nicer to have sort of a more contrasty, punchy image. So now that we've kind of done that, we're kind of gonna take a step back from what we just did and add some contrast, which is going to remove some detail from the shadows. So I'm probably not gonna do it too much. I'll boost the whites just a little and bring the blacks down. So this is before and this is after. Dehaze is an interesting thing to play around with. Sometimes it works and sometimes it just does not work at all. And as far as the crop goes, I would like it to be a little lower, but there's not much I can do about that now. Like, I can't physically add information into the photo that isn't there. So we're just gonna deal with that. That looks pretty good. The white balance looks fine to me, so I'm gonna leave it as it is. We're gonna go into detail. Again, I'm not gonna increase the sharpening just because more sharpening means more noise, and we've already added some noise to the photo. But I will turn on the masking, and we'll zoom into somewhere in here. You can also adjust this little viewfinder here and select where you want it to zoom into so you can see a very close-up image of what the noise what the noise reduction is doing, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so before and after. We're just gonna add our lens correction. I believe this was shot with the kit lens of my Rebel camera. This lens right here, not a great lens. It gets the job done, but I don't use it anymore, that's for sure. So we're gonna hit enable profile correction. So yeah, as you can see, it shows the 18-55 kit lens. This is actually a slightly different version than the one I have. This one says it's for the image stabilized version. Mine is not the image stabilized version, but the lenses are similar enough that the profile correction still works. So I'm not complaining. And that is about it. Now, if your lens does have a natural vignette and you want to keep the vignette in the photo, what I would recommend doing is going to lens corrections and enabling them anyways to remove the vignette in the lens, and then come here into effects and add your vignette this way. It just allows you more creative control over what the vignette looks like. Also, this is kind of like a beginner tip. It really has nothing to do with this video, but please don't add vignettes like this to your photos. It just doesn't look good. If you add a vignette, it has to be very, very subtle. Like on this photo, I wouldn't go more than that. Vignettes can work, but if it's over the top, it just looks horrible. All right, so the final before and after. This is before, and this is after. This can be taken farther than what I showed, but I just kind of wanted to do a sort of basic editing video and sort of to show you the power of raw files, because I didn't really do anything special here. All the information was there, I just moved the right sliders in order to bring out that information. And this is why you should always shoot raw, because these are old photos, but I can come back years later and edit these photos with my new style and new knowledge of how to take photos and get a much better result out of them. This is also something fun to do if you're stuck at home right now, and depending on where you live, you are probably quarantined to your house at the moment. So going through the old archives of photos and seeing what photos you maybe missed, maybe at the time you thought weren't worth it, but now maybe this video helped you understand that you can edit those photos and turn them into something cool. So if you do try this out and you go through your old files and recover some cool photos, then let me know. You can tag me on Instagram. I would love to see what you guys come up with. Alright, I think that's gonna do it for this video. If you guys liked it, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. Also, I just wanted to thank you guys for all subscribing. The subscribers have been going up a lot quicker recently. We're still a very small channel, but hey, we're growing. So thank you guys, and I will see you in the next video. This reflector is huge. Look at this. I'm gonna reflect it back in the camera. I didn't feel like setting up a second light today, so I just kind of stuck this to a light stand right here. See, this is with the reflector, and that's without. But this thing is probably way more annoying to deal with than my little light, so I probably won't use this again for videos, but hey.